Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Poland Daily History. Today we are visiting the Pawiak Prison Museum in Warsaw. This prison is one of the most famous places for Polish martyrdom during the Second World War, where 100,000 prisoners passed through these gates during the war, of which 47,000 were murdered. This prison is one of the most well-known sites of Polish martyrdom during the Second World War, with around 100,000 prisoners passing through its gates during the war, and 37,000 of them were murdered. Join us as we explore the history of one of the most brutal aspects of the German occupation. The Pawiak prison is most well known to the Poles due to the atrocities committed by the Germans during the Second World War. But I know the prison was built way before that, and I was hoping we can kick things off from the beginning and you can tell me when it was built and for what purpose it served.
Historia więzienia na Pawiaku rozpoczęła się w roku 1829.
The history of the Pawiak prison began in 1829. It was a modern investigative prison erected by the decision of the then authorities of the Kingdom of Poland at the request of Fryderyk Skarbek, a reformer of the penitentiary system. Pawiak was intended to be an absolutely unique institution, a modern institution on the scale of the Kingdom of Poland, as well as on the scale of entire Europe. It was originally intended for almost 430 criminal detainees, some of whom were still there during their investigation, while others were waiting for a judgment in their cases. Pawiak's building was over 150 meters long and had 4 floors. It was equipped with modern installations, both sewage and heating. It was a very modern facility for the first half of the 19th century, which served as an investigative prison, a place where prisoners were detained until 1863, when the character of the prison changed completely.
Charakter zupełnie uległ zmianie.
So in which year was the prison opened, and what did Warsaw look like back during those days?
Więzienie zostało oddane do użytku.
The prison was put into use 6 years after the construction started in 1835, 4 years later after the fall of the November Uprising. At this point, it became a Russian prison, a prison that, as I mentioned earlier, could accommodate several hundred inmates. Until the subsequent uprising in 1863, Pawiak served as a criminal prison. In those years, the main Warsaw prison, where political prisoners were kept, was the 10th pavilion of the Warsaw Citadel, a Vistula fortress built by Russians immediately after the fall of the November Uprising.
Upadku powstania listopadowego.
So you mentioned earlier that the prison is built upon the ideas of one Fryderyk Skarbek, and he had a whole new perception towards how prisons are supposed to be built. And can you tell me what are the differences with this modern prison compared to the older ones before him?
Przede wszystkim więzienie przy ulicy Pawie, więzienie wzniesione przy ulicy Pawie, przy ulicy Dzielnej.
First of all, the prison at Pawia Street, Dzielna Street, was quickly named Pawiak by the inhabitants of Warsaw. It was a modern institution, unlike the 17th and 18th century prisons, which were usually located within the city walls or were located in towers. Pawiak was a detached building. Each prisoner was assigned a separate cell, spacious, decently furnished, and well lit. These cells were of course heated, while the entire prison was sewered. First of all, Fryderyk Skarbek assumed that prisoners should be kept in humanitarian conditions. He tried, together with Henryk Marconi, the designer of the building, to provide them with the most civilized conditions for serving a sentence or staying there during the course of their investigation.
Jak najbardziej cywilizowane warunki odbywania kary czy przebywania pod śledztwem.
In 1863, the Poles and many other nationalities of the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth rose up against the Russian Empire in what became known as the January Uprising. The uprising was crushed in 1864, and the Russians found themselves in need of prison cells for the thousands and thousands of political prisoners. As a result, the Pawiak prison had to face significant changes. So as I understand, the character of the prison went through a drastic reform at the 1860s, and I was wondering what are the changes that were made.
Wydarzeniami, które spowodowały zmianę charakteru Pawiaka.
The event that changed the Pawiak's character from a criminal prison to a political prison was the outbreak of the January Uprising, an independence struggle against the Russian partitioners. From 1863, Pawiak became a place of isolation not only of criminal prisoners, not only people suspected of committing common crimes. Members of the January Uprising began to be detained in Pawiak too. They were not only people who fought with weapons in hand, also people who supported the uprising, provided weapons, ammunition or medicine. There were even people who simply showed support for the very idea of independence. As we have already mentioned, the 10th Pavilion of the Warsaw Citadel was the place where the political prisoners were detained. It soon turned out that the number of people detained in connection with their suspicions of participation in the January Uprising was so great that the walls of this edifice would not be able to accommodate them all. In the period of the January Uprising, members of the national government, including Romuald Traugott, were thrown inside the Pawiak walls. All 5 were later executed on the slopes of the Warsaw Citadel.
Na stokach Cytadeli Warszawskiej.
So during World War II, the inmates here were able to establish like a network of resistance, and I was wondering if there are evidence of that during also the January Uprising.
Tego, co wiadomo współczesnym badaczom, po powstaniu styczniowym.
From what is known to contemporary researchers, between the January Uprising and 1918, Pawiak practically did not have organized prisoner units. Of course, the prisoners tried to organize contact with the outside world to send their so-called grypsy, i.e. secret letters drawn up on the other side of the prison wall. However, it did not bear the characteristics of organized activity. Between the January Uprising and the end of First World War, there was practically no organized conspiracy within Pawiak walls.
Zorganizowana konspiracja.
So can you fill me in about the development of the prison from the January Uprising all the way until the First World War? Were there expansions to the prison, new building structures being made? How did they look like?
Wiemy, że w latach 70., z końcem lat 70. wieku XIX nastąpiła rozbudowa Pawiaka.
We know that in the 1870s there was an expansion of Pawiak. Until then, the prisoners stayed in this huge 4-story building, which according to the assumptions of the designers could accommodate less than 430 prisoners. Practice showed that, in fact, about 700 people were kept there. On the other hand, among the detainees, more and more women were getting into both common crimes and political independence activities. With them in mind, the Pawiak complex was extended by another building, a tenement house at Dzielna Street, a tenement house in which, at the end of the 1870s, a Russian military hospital was housed for veterans of the Russo-Turkish War, called the Serbian War, named by the place where they fought. Instead of calling it the Hospital for the Veterans of the Serbian War, the people of Warsaw called it simply Serbia. This name remained when the former hospital building was handed over to the prison authorities as a place of detention for women arrested on various charges. The area of the prison grew. It was surrounded by a relatively high, several-meter wall, while the plots around the prison were incorporated into the city. More tenement houses began to appear there.
Włączono w obręb miasta. Zaczęły pojawiać się tutaj kolejne kamienice czynszowe.
After the breaking out of the First World War, at one point the Germans occupied Warsaw, and I was wondering what did that signify for the Pawiak prison?
During the outbreak of the First World War, the Russians ordered the evacuation of Pawiak prisoners. In August 1915, the prison was overtaken by Germans who decided to use the prison building in the same way, as a place of detaining criminals as well as political prisoners, in this case, independence activists. Above all, they were activists of the Polish military organization striving to fight for independence. Of course, Pawiak was an investigative prison, so people detained by the Germans on political grounds were here briefly before they were sent away, usually to the fortresses occupied by German troops.
Zajętych przez wojska niemieckie.
As we have seen today, the Pawiak prison is a place of special importance in Polish history. During the 4 years it was operated by the Germans, the level of brutality created an urge for revenge, which finally erupted on August 1st, 1944, the first day of the Warsaw Uprising. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. I'll see you next time on Poland Daily History.